Well, I'm recently been let out of what I would deem YouTube jail for this video right here. Hopefully it appears like it woke one person up. I got a thumbs up before it was removed, and I was given a strike, so I couldn't upload for 7 days. Uh, if you've been following my series here, I'm on part 7 of observational anomalies that belie the model. And in this part, I would like to nail down the specifics of our lying model and how they claim a total solar eclipse occurs. Zealot curveballers like to pretend like there's wiggle room in the specific nature that applies to a total solar eclipse so that they can use engineering tools such as AutoCAD to pretend like they can model it and it'll work when they cannot. And it's no shock, no wonder anyone that is inquisitive about this information will see that when it comes to specific details like parallax or the location of the sun, earth, moon system when the total solar eclipse occurs, NASA is very vague, not very specific. They never explain those two things in detail. It's very hard to find that information, but I'm going to present it here. And I want you to notice that prestigious places like professors at MIT in astronomy, when going to explain a recent 2020 eclipse in South America, will show different video feeds from different locations, and you'll see the sun, the bite out of the disk of the sun occurring in opposite locations or different limbs of the sun, and they never explain it. They go ad nauseum into the Bailey's beads and well, the diamond ring effect. And what I noticed was, dating back to the 2017 national news footage of that, they claimed it was a certain mountain range or craters that created that. But this professor from MIT was quite vague and acted like it could occur anywhere from any mountain range, as in my opinion, a way to cover up the fact that when you film it from different vantage points, the diamond ring effect and Bailey's beads occurs all the way around the moon. And that shouldn't be, because anyone that can zoom in with a P1000 camera will see that certain limbs of the moon are very smooth. Some other sides are rough. So that doesn't correlate. So again, they use the vagueness in their description as a way to cover the lies. But they're trapped with specifics that they can't get out of, like an annular eclipse and how that occurs. So it's in the details that we catch them in their lies. The priests of pseudoscience have no problem explaining something that they can try to make fit their pseudoscientific belief. But when it comes to why the eclipse path is offset up and down, they don't go into detail. None of these professors at these prestigious universities go into that explanation. They'll show it to you and then gloss over it and start talking about things like this. That is reminiscent of this NASA cartoon of the 2017 total solar eclipse. Pollster X tries to explain this here as parallax. NASA, none of these professors ever do that. They show it to you here in this NASA cartoon, but again, just like the professor in his cartoon, they gloss over it and begin starting to talk about Bailey's beads and the diamond ring effect. My Hillbilly EDU channel, I want to go on to deeper information some of you don't know. Right here results in a total solar eclipse. These are partials. You understand? If the new moon occurs while the sun is within this angular distance around this node, a solar eclipse must occur. Only here is it total. These are partial again. So when you hear Polster X get on my video there and claim that actually that's not the case, that the moon is some 1,600 miles above the ecliptic plane, and that's why you see it in North America. It's not true. Show these believers in this pseudoscience this right here. The North Pole, ascending node, meaning the moon is going up in its path, and descending node is coming down. See, when you get these curveballers cornered, they just want to try to belittle you and act like, oh, you don't understand geometry or trig, dude. It's like, what do I need to do? Produce a transcript of my grades from university? I mean, come on. Morons process. I mean, he doesn't want to be pigeonholed into the constraints of his model because it proves it's a lie. So he can't deflect, so he has to, attack me on an intellectual level. I mean, it's just silly how these people operate. It's like you're cornered, you should say, oh, you're right, you've got a point there. But no, can never say that a flat earther has a logical point here, because then my belief system crumbles. So I must avoid that at all costs. Here's his last reply. Syzygy doesn't mean the moon has to be on the node. It literally means three bodies are aligned. This can happen if the bodies where the moon is on its node or not. The moron's orbit process, Bert, the node crossing doesn't like up, I guess he means link up, with the ecliptic for most of the time. If you understood the geometry, you'd get that. See? Here's what I really wrote. You only get a total eclipse when the sun and moon are on the node at the ecliptic plane. Remember syzygy? Well, that's three spaceballs in a line, okay? That's what I'm saying here. And the ecliptic plane is the path the Earth orbits in. So all three of them lined up on that. That's how you get this. That's the only way you get this. That's why they explain we don't have one every month. I mean, he doesn't want to be constrained by this because he came up with an AutoCAD drawing. At first, it was 20 miles above the equator. Then, in order for it to work at North America, he has to put it up 1,600 miles north of the ecliptic plane, and it can't be there. The moon has to be on the ecliptic. That's how this happens. And this is why they never explain parallax as the reason for the bite on the disk of the sun. I really want to go over this in this part because this man constantly tries to rehabilitate our false model every time you show anomalies that prove it can't be true. He'll try to pick out where you misspoke, like in the last video I said something like solstice when it was apparently the, equinox. But when it comes to the details of what you're saying, he can't really refute. So he will conflagrate some idea like, MoonCalc only calculates the percentage of the moon to 1 decimal point. So it really wasn't 100% full. But if you see here, he talks about how it only occurs near a node, not on the node, and as geometry dictates, and he claims that's what they claim. Well, that's not true. I mean, I've researched this before I ever started talking about this in the series. When you get into the minutia of the details, the arguments don't make sense. There are abnormalities or opposite effects from what they describe. Like, for instance, an ascending node shows the path descending on the ball Earth. So opposite things occur when you look into the details of it. So He has to always create a wiggle room to make it seem plausible. And that's what I've gone over here. Because he just can't realize or come to the conclusion that, hey, there's a firmament, and that could explain why these things occur, that everyone in North America could face south to see the 2017 solar eclipse. And if you're north of the center line of totality, the bite out of the disk of the sun would be reversed from someone that was south of the line of totality, the center line, even though everybody's facing south. This type of thing here, a firmament, would create that result. And we can't have that in his mind, so he has to try and create a wiggle room to make our story seem plausible. Will, these people that claim flat earthers don't understand the heliocentric model. No, we understand it a hell of a lot better than these blind followers of this BS. This fella here, I'm sure you may have found someone saying the moon needs to be on a node crossing during a conversation. It's shorthand, simplification, like saying that I live in Leeds, which I do, but on the outskirts and not the city center. Okay? See, he always has to split hairs because I'm going to show this part where it's not just people talking, it's professors, okay, at prestigious universities and other colleges around the country teaching this stuff. Yes, people at NASA are probably in the know about what they can and cannot say. So on these very specific things, they're very quiet, very vague. They don't talk about it. They can't explain it, so they don't talk about it. So anyway, I go into detail down here, explaining what I'm going to show him because he can't handle it. See, it blows his idea of how the 2017 total solar eclipse occurred. And then all he seizes on is me mentioning syzygy. Well, that doesn't mean they're on the ecliptic plane. But look at what I said. The total eclipse when the sun, moon on the node at the ecliptic plane. Remember syzygy? That's just a fancy way of saying they're all three in a line on the ecliptic plane. And then what does he do? He doesn't mention any of that stuff that I mentioned. He goes down here and says, syzygy doesn't mean the moon is on the node. Literally means three bodies are aligned. You see how he tries to split hairs? And this is based on his thought that perhaps I've got people saying it's syzygy. No, dude, that's just a fancy word of saying that all three space balls are in a line. And if you look up the definition of syzygy, what's it tell you? Okay, and they're talking about new moon and full moon is when the sun or the moon is in line with the earth and the moon. See, three space bodies. These are the three space bodies they're talking about when they're talking about syzygy, okay?
About 30% of them are cigarette smokers, and only 4 of them that I met are from around here.
Can you see what they are doing? They are creating a false narrative to promote a false demographic of people that believe the earth is flat. Primarily fringe outsiders shouting in unhinged ways on the streets, people having midlife crises who have lost their wives or dress ridiculously, but consider themselves normal. The media are generating a perception of the type of people who will believe the earth is flat, and it is highly manipulative and plays into the concepts of what Charles Bukowski called the genius of the crowd, the predictable propensity in people to always side with the masses out of insecurity, for fear of being rejected and ridiculed. No one would want to associate with a demographic of people that are represented as outsiders on the fringe of society. If the majority believe something, then most will follow. It applies to many things in life, from trends, reviews and critical acclaim, and to political beliefs and worldviews. People are attracted to the mass opinion. No one wants to be associated with a flat earther after watching these videos through fear of being laughed at, or they will stop in their exploration of flat earth because the media represents a community as a collection of fringe or insane individuals. It isn't glamorous. or even given the intellectual recognition it deserves. There is no in-depth discussion of the science behind the flat Earth model, just a false demographic narrative. The media here intervene to stop people even giving it a chance. YouTube pushes this content to the forefront. Another selected video is titled, "How Average People Fall for Flat Earth." What do they mean, average people? They are patronizing us and playing the same tired hand of promoting bamboozlement as some kind of exclusive genius that the ordinary folk cannot fully grasp. YouTube's content fluctuates between making fun at the so-called flat earth idiots, aggressive debunking videos, and comedy sketches where people ask, if the earth is flat, why does no one fall off the edge? Flat earthers have never once said that there is an edge you can fall off from. And this type of redundant humour is enforced with memes. If you Google search flat earth, not only do the algorithms push forward similar content, but its image search is filled with satirical images that misrepresent the entire argument put forth by the flat earth community. You see, terms like flat earthers and flat earth community create a false idea that there is a unit of people that all hold the same specific beliefs. I am using it in this video for the sake of argument, but in reality, flat earthers are just people digging for the truth, all with very different views and conclusions drawn from extensive research.
You kind of correlating with all this. I can't believe you're on the level real. I can have you believe the same of you. Get some of the boys together. We'll have some fun with this foreign dude. Hey, you like this jerkwater town?
Why are they all treated that way, Bob?
Well, it's a little hard to explain, son. Someone who's strange or different is often treated with cruelty.
But why?
Ignorance, mostly. Sometimes when people don't understand something, they think it's to be feared or hated. That's wrong. It takes a long time to learn differently.
This is a propaganda technique in which the government officials, the media, and others literally flood our zone with the same messaging. It operates on repetition to create a consensus of belief. It can instill both fear and reassurance, and works to shape our understanding of the world. They also talk about employing trusted voices to enforce their messaging. Trusted voices primarily take the form of organization officials, spokespersons, celebrities, and famous individuals in whom we trust and admire. That's why Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom York are great puppets to promote action for climate change, and Beyoncé and John Boyega lead the way to enforce dangerous, divisive social movements like Black Lives Matter. We have seen so many celebrities from Lady Gaga, Piers Morgan, and many others reinforce the importance of following the rules during the COVID-19 pandemic. Celebrities and Hollywood stars, as we have seen, are complicit in this, and they have everything in the world, but there will be times when they are called upon to do the work of steering our minds in certain directions. It is these same tactics of manipulation that we see in the coverage of Flat Earth. Throughout the last 5 years, as Flat Earth was gaining popularity and people were beginning to question the absurdity of living on a giant spinning space testicle, many took to social media platforms such as YouTube, Facebook and Twitter to collectively start exploring the notion that our Earth is not a globe. Let's examine the media's response to this and the use of trusted voices.
To be going backwards. Like you talk in the book about how we now have to listen to people saying the earth is flat.
Yeah. Yes, that's one of the pieces in there is about the new Flat Earth International Conference. It isn't a conference from the 14th century. This is a conference that started, I think, in 2017. And it is a growing thing, and that's because people are so contrarian, people are so willing to believe unsubstantiated things that have websites, that they are now going back on the conclusion we have all rightly drawn about the shape of the planet we live on. And that people are sort of going, and by people I mean idiots, and saying, I'm a questioning person, so why am I going to go along with this idea that the world is round? Well, I'll tell you why, because people went up in a rocket, looked out of the window and took a bloody photo.
Theory.
Put aside the fact that we've taken photographs of it and you can see a horizon, and not only can you see the horizon, But you can see things move behind the horizon or in front of the horizon, depending on the height that you choose to look at the things. You see, I'm lost for words. It's probably the most nonsensical suggestion that a thinking human being could possibly make. It is drivel.
I went through several hours of videos from different astronomy professors critiquing what we see during a total solar eclipse. And when you see footage like this, where they have it filmed from one side of the center line of totality and then the other, and you see that it's coming the shadow from different angles on the face of the disk of the sun, they don't talk about that. Zealot curveballers will try to explain it as parallax, but they won't say that because at the areas that this one particularly is happening in South America, that kind of stuff doesn't work. Only when it occurs during, at a perspective over the tropics would parallax make sense, because then it would be directly above that position. You know, everyone in South America that's watching this is facing north. So how could it be that on one side of the line it comes from a different angle or the opposite direction? I mean, it totally defies what they would tell you, so they don't even mention it. Every time that's shown, they're talking about something else. They never get into the detail of that. They just totally gloss over it and begin to talk about something else. They never talk about this stuff here. So it's just another oddity that you never hear them explain. It's harder and harder to find them talking about the alignment because, again, the precision that they explain this occurring. If the moon is not at the certain distance, you'll get an annular. If it's all three space balls aren't lined up with syzygy and on the ecliptic plane and at the node, you won't get a total solar eclipse. It would just be a partial. So these are facts that you can use to belie the model. And I'll go through the principles of what they use or what they describe is going on so that you can lock them down in their theory and then prove that it's not true. I had made a previous part here and had a copyright strike or claim against the video, and I merely reiterated that the video is made for educational purposes. So they reviewed it and removed the copyright. I'm going to stick with nothing but flat earth topics on this channel from now on this platform. Anything that is of significance, you know, ongoing events, even though you find the video on this platform and just put it together, they can claim it's this here, and therefore they gave me a strike and deleted this video. So I'm not even going to risk it, just an attempt to get the flat earth truth out. And I've gone ahead and stuck that video up on other platforms of the same name, Hillbilly EDU. This is the link at my channel on BitChute, and I'm in the process of putting it up on a few other platforms where you can still share truthful information without censorship. But going forward here, it's harder and harder to talk on this platform openly about certain topics. They'll delete videos, and as you can see, there's one that's been hidden that they deleted talking about something they don't want you to think about. But if you'll watch this little 2-minute video I've made about recent news and how they describe conspiracy theories, keeping the number of vaccinated people to a minimum. I'm sure over time that'll be switched to Christians, because as of yet, we haven't seen widespread people attacking the body of Christ, as it states in Revelations. So I would assume over time, as they progress this narrative of this storyline of people that won't get it, they'll lump them into being of a certain religious ideology.
Now we might ask the question, why don't solar eclipses happen every new moon? Because earlier we said in order for a solar eclipse to occur, it has to be a new moon. So why doesn't solar eclipse happen every month? Why doesn't it happen every time it's new moon? So in order to understand that, we got to understand something. The moon's orbit around the Earth is tilted at 5 degrees with respect to the ecliptical plane. In other words, as the Earth is going around the sun, or like this, the moon's orbit around the Earth is tilted. See, tilt. It's not like this. So if this is the Earth's orbit around the sun, the moon's orbit is like this. And so it's kind of hard for the moon to be directly between us and the sun and to be crossing the plane of the Earth's orbit. You see? I wish it wasn't like that, because if it wasn't like that, we would get solar eclipse every month. We would get lunar eclipse every month, you know? So if we show this video, see here, same, it's going to show you this thing. See here? It's going around. See how it's falling below? It's going above. So even though it's a new moon, now it's going to be solar eclipse. You see how it's crossing the ecliptical plane? Lunar eclipse, solar eclipse. So the shadow of the Earth is exactly falling on it. This one, no eclipse possible. You see? The shadow of the moon is not falling on the Earth. Earth's shadow is not falling on the moon. So no eclipse possible in that case. Now it's possible right here. You see? So in order for an eclipse to happen, you must have a condition where the moon's orbit in the sky, you see, this is the 5-degree tilt right here. You see? So the moon's orbit is 5 degrees tilted. So when the moon is at its new moon phase, it needs to be at its node. You see the node here? Right now, the new moon is occurring, but it's not occurring over there. If the sun was over there and the moon was over there, you would be getting a total solar eclipse, you see? The moon over there, the sun over there, boom, total solar eclipse. Right now, new moon, sun over here. What kind of eclipse is this? Starts with P. Partial solar eclipse. So that's why they're not happening every month. It's because of this 5-degree tilt between the moon's orbit and the Earth's orbit. So the conditions for a solar eclipse are the moon has to be in its new moon phase. We already said that earlier. But the second condition, it needs to be at its node, which is here. Another way to say that is the moon has to be crossing the ecliptical plane. That's another way to say it needs to be at its node. The moon has to be crossing the ecliptical plane. How often does this happen? It's very complicated. It's a cycle known as the Saros cycle.
Called the Saros cycle. It was discovered that every 18 years, 10.3 days, an entire cycle will repeat itself the way solar eclipses occur, a total of 6,585.3 days. What that means is that 18 years, 10.3 days later, the entire cycle repeats, and since it's 10.3, the 0.3 days is a third of a day, which is about 120 degrees. The entire cycle repeats itself, but 120 degrees further westward. So on March the 9th, 1997, we had a total solar eclipse here in the polar region, and 18 years, 10.3 days later, we'll have another one in the polar region, but about 120 degrees shifted to the west. Now, what we do realize is that the whole cycle starts with an eclipse in the polar region. The whole cycle covers about 40 eclipses. Now, I say about because it could potentially change on occasion, and the conditions are just right, but the solar cycle typically contains exactly 40 solar eclipses. And also on alternate cycles, the eclipse will start a little further north or a little bit further south, back and forth, back and forth. So we see that trend there as well with the startup of the solar eclipse. So that's what's known as the Saros cycle. And it's very interesting. Because of that, we have a really good way of predicting when the next solar eclipses will occur. So if you ever wondered, wow, how did they figure it out? Well, they've already figured out, and we can go into the future and pretty well know when the next solar eclipses will occur and about where they will occur, because we have a very good standard cycle under control now. So we really know what that looks like. And in the next video, we'll map it out for you so you can take a look at it. And it's quite amazing how they actually... Welcome to Lecture Online, and here we have the Saros cycle in all its detail. So this is a detailed look at the solar eclipse cycle that occurs every 18 years, 10 days, or 10.3 days. So the total of 6,585.3 days per cycle. And so starting the cycle in 1997, we had an eclipse, a total eclipse on March 9th. September the 2nd was a partial eclipse. February 26th, we have the total eclipse. August 22, we had an annual eclipse, and so forth. So you can go down the row and see how we had all these eclipses, a total of 40 in the cycle that lasted 18 years, 10.3 days. Notice there were times that we had two sets of solar eclipses in the same year. Here we had in the year 2000, one on February 5th, one on July 1st, one on July 31st, and one on December 25th. So you can see we had two solar eclipses 1 month apart. They both had to be partial eclipses because we got one side of the sun on the one eclipse, and a month later another side of the sun. As the moon slowly moved through the ecliptic plane, it caught the sun once at the top and again at the bottom. Maybe it went down or maybe it went up, I don't know. But either way, it was twice in a given month period, so to speak, while it was going through the ecliptic plane. Sometimes there's a jump. For example, here, notice how every month there's about a 10-day difference. December 25th, December 14th, December 4th, November 23rd. There's about a 10, 11-day shift every year as to when the solar eclipses occur. And here you see again, October 14th, October 3rd, September 22nd, September 11th, and then instead of jumping to about September the 1st, it jumps to August the 1st. It skips a complete month. With other words, the moon went through the ecliptic plane, but somehow it missed the ability to cover the sun's disk, and so we did not have a solar eclipse until the following month of the following year. And so that's kind of interesting that happens. So sometimes it doubles up, sometimes it misses. But all in all, the whole cycle has about 40 eclipses, in this case 40 exactly. And then notice, in 2015, 18 years later after 1997, 10.3 days later, so we have March the 9th, March the 20th, February 26th, March the 9th, and so forth. So 10.3 days later, we have the new set starting, the new cycle starting. Notice we have a total, annular, and a partial, total, annual, partial. We have a partial, annual, total, and partial. So again, the cycle doesn't only repeat, but it also repeats in the type of solar eclipse that we're going to see based upon the position of the sun, the moon, and the earth. Really interesting. Somebody, by taking enough observations, finally noticed that, wrote it all down, and from that we can now predict in the future when the next solar eclipses are going to happen based upon the repetitive nature of the cycle of what we call the Saros cycle of the solar eclipses. I thought that was really interesting that someone's actually able to figure that out, but now that we have the benefit of knowing when the next solar eclipse is going to occur, what date, what type of eclipse is going to be, and if we work everything out in detail, almost down to the minute, can we figure out when the next solar eclipse is going to happen. So that's pretty amazing that they've done that.
Ask is, why don't we have an eclipse every month? Because the total solar eclipse happens at the time of new moon, when the moon is in the direction of the sun. And of course that happens every month or every month. And so why don't we have an eclipse every month? And the reason is that the moon's orbit has a tilt to it. And so most often when it's time for new moon or full moon, when the moon might go into Earth shadow, usually the moon is just above or below the plane of the Earth's orbit, and so the shadow misses. So we can kind of see that in this diagram where we can see the tilt of the moon's orbit, and you can see the shadow of the moon missing the Earth and the shadow of the Earth missing the moon over the course of that orbit. So the tilt of the moon's orbit means that we don't get an eclipse every new moon or every full moon. And, so something special has to happen. There has to be a very special alignment at the time of new moon in order to see a total solar eclipse. And that is that the moon must be crossing the plane of the Earth's orbit at the same time as, the moon must be crossing the plane of the Earth's orbit at the same time the phase of the moon is new moon. And it turns out that that plane of the Earth's orbit is called the ecliptic plane, because that's where the moon has to be in order to see an eclipse. So astronomers have known about this for millennia. That's why we give the plane of the Earth's orbit a special name, the ecliptic plane. It's this really fortuitous alignment where we have new moon, and that is when the moon is on a line between the Earth and the sun. And at the same time, the moon has to be in the same orbit plane of the Earth, called the ecliptic plane. But there's another factor that gets involved here, and that's because the moon's orbit is not circular. And if the moon is at a slightly changing distance from us, that means that the apparent size of the moon from the arctangent equation that Amanda showed, if the moon is slightly different, has slightly different distance from the Earth, its size is going to get smaller or larger, depending if it's further or closer to the Earth. And so at its closest point, the closest point in its orbit, what we call perigee, that's when the size of the moon, and that's where the equation that Amanda just showed you is very well matched to the size of the sun. And so right now the moon is at nearly its closest point in its orbit, about 356,000 kilometers. And that means that the moon is just right. The size of the moon in our sky is just right to block out the sun. But there are other times of the year when the new moon comes at the time when the moon is at apogee, or at its furthest point in its orbit. So the apparent size of the moon, that arctangent of theta, is a little smaller, and the moon is just a little bit too small in its angular size to completely cover the disk of the sun. And this is where we get an annular eclipse. And an annular eclipse, the last one we had was back in June of this year. An annular eclipse is very interesting to see, but it's not quite as spectacular during its total phase because you still have the bright disk of the sun around the edges of the moon. And that bright disk of the sun doesn't allow us to see the amazing structure of the outer corona, the outer layers of the sun. And so this is what makes total solar eclipses so special and so rare, is you have to get a confluence of events. You have to have the moon at perigee. You have to have the new moon occurring at the time that the moon itself is in its orbit, crossing the ecliptic plane, or the orbit plane of the Earth. So really a pretty amazing set of geometries.